Hey, what's going on guys? I'm Mark and I'm currently working on building a custom sound system in my dad's daily driver with the goal of awesome sound quality. When it comes to getting great sound quality, it can be very advantageous to use a three-way component set. Much like this set here, the JL Audio C7 components that I recently did an overview video on. But the problem is when you have a three-way component set with that 3.5-inch mid-range and that tweeter, a lot of vehicles don't have a factory spot for those to mount. So how can I modify the A-pillars in this vehicle to mount both the mid and the tweeter? Where am I going to aim the speakers? How do I make sure that the new pillars are perfectly symmetrical? And what does the fiberglass process look like for making these custom pillars? Welcome to CarAudioFabrication, the channel where together we learn how to master car audio and how to design, build, and install our dream car audio system. If you'd like to see product overview videos, lesson videos, and build log videos like this video, I'd love to have you as a subscriber. All right, my friends, let's get on in to making these pillars. To get this custom process started, I start with taking some measurements of the C7 component speakers themselves. These dimensions allow me to create a design for that baffle plate and the inserts, and in this case, I'm cutting these on acrylic on laser. Whoa, Mark, I don't have a laser. How am I going to do this? Not to worry, my friends. I did this for years without a laser. I have some suggestions for you in just a second. I've got all of the speaker mount assembly completely cut out. These pieces here are made of 1/4 inch because they are going to sit like this. And then these inserts that are gloss black that you will see slightly behind the speaker, those insert in just like that. Now, what if you didn't have a laser? I want to give you guys a few other ideas here. You could very easily make this shape out of wood. You could do this by carefully measuring out and drawing on the wood and then using a jigsaw and then carefully sanding each of these rounded parts. It just takes a little bit more time. I did it that way for many years. I eventually graduated to using a router and a couple of different small templates. You just got to make do with what you have. But the difficult part with making this out of hand tools instead of using a precise machine like a laser is how do you make this thin part here that we're going to actually stretch our material up to? What you can do is you can get some of this material here. This is called low temp plastic. It's sold by Mobile Solutions. It comes in a big sheet, but you can cut it in strips of whatever height you want. And let's say that we have our wooden piece and we'd want to make a copy of this for a plug. So let's just use this temporarily. This plastic is extremely flexible, as you can see. So what we would do is we would start to attach it to our base piece just using a staple gun, and then we can actually heat it up, and once you heat it up, it really starts to form, and you can form it completely around this shape. And what that does is you would then pop out your extra piece here, and you would have a nice lip going around the outside here that is nice and skinny that you can stretch your material over and that you can still have your insert piece like this sit down into. I actually use this stuff quite often in some of my original videos here on the channel. First, I need to remove the backing paper from these acrylic rings because I'm going to use some acrylic cement to attach the outer ring to the mounting base. The acrylic cement actually melts the acrylic, so we're basically welding these two pieces together so they're super strong, and I fully expect that during this process of fiberglassing and sanding that these will get really scratched up, which is fine because that's why I made this insert plate. Once I wrap these with the upholstery materials, my upholstery material will tuck down into that gap. I'll push this in and then mount the speakers, and this final piece will be nice and glossy, looking good. To make the shape of the surface on our custom A-pillars, I'm going to be using a stretchy grill cloth material. And I'm going to have to stretch that grill cloth over the edge of this and attach it here. Now the thing is, if I stretch the grill cloth over the top of this and then fiberglass, it's going to add additional thickness to the top of this ring. And it's kind of hard to explain, but the finished product just isn't going to look quite right. So what I want to do is create a small little notch into the corner of this ring. Let me make that cut really quick and then it's going to make more sense. For this, I'm going to use this 1/8 inch rabbiting bit. So that has created this step right here. Imagine this piece of paper is the grill cloth. Now there is clearance for that grill cloth to sit down right here, and then I can put fiberglass resin and fiberglass materials and body filler on top of it. I have plenty of thickness there to then sand down to this original height of the acrylic. It makes the sanding process a lot easier. You're not trying to sand through multiple different materials to get back to this acrylic. It's easier to sand everything flush to that surface. Next, I need to start making preparations to the actual A-pillars themselves. Now, as a disclaimer, if your A-pillar panels have airbags behind them, doing any sort of modification to the A-pillar panels is at your own risk. I've done my research to make sure that these aren't going to impact how the airbags perform, and you need to do your own research in determining how to do this. The next step that I'm going to do is I need to remove this little tweeter insert here. I removed those because I know I'm going to be cutting away plastic from this area. Might as well save that piece, because this I'm going to be mounting in this general location here. To get a good idea exactly where I want to locate this, I need to get these back in the vehicle. The first thing I always do is I use a Sharpie to mark out a line on the panel where it meets the dash. The reason I do this is you can see that there is like no clearance between these two panels. So I don't want to be adding fiberglass or body filler or anything below that line, because this won't go back together. Now the next thing I'll do, and I'll have to do this off camera because it's hard to hold the camera and the ring at the same time, but I'm going to get a rough idea for where I want this positioned, and I'm going to trace out holes for the two speakers. That way I know where I need to make some clearance by cutting the panel itself. I now have those hole locations marked, so I can take this tool here. This is my trusty old air saw, and I'm going to use it to carefully trim on that line. I definitely recommend making an investment in a good air saw. It makes a huge difference. I'll put a link to the one that I like to use down in the video description. Now that the holes are cut, we know that we have clearance for our speaker to actually mount, and we can keep this nice and low profile and close to the panel. Let's get these back in the vehicle so we can mount these. So when I go to mount these, the age-old question comes up, where should we actually aim the speakers? Well, what's really nice about the C7 component speakers is they have really good off-axis performance, which means we don't have to have the speaker aiming directly at us to have a nice response. We can have the speaker off-axis, which allows us to have a more aesthetically pleasing look by mounting this much more close to the shape of the original panel. What is important is symmetry, so we can take my specialized speaker aiming tool that I sell on my site that has the laser pointer there, and we can position this, and we can look and see where the dot is on the other side of the vehicle. That way when we position the one that's over there, we'll make sure that it's aiming to a similar location. To get the speaker mount to stand off of our surface here, I use these short little wooden dowels that I cut. I'm not very fond of this process because it's definitely not very glamorous. What you want to do is start with making one dowel the length that you need it to be, and then you kind of just continue to make these different dowels the different lengths and secure them to your piece until you get the right angle that you're looking for. I know, it's not pretty, but it works. You want to give yourself 4 or 5 different dowel spots like this, and then what you're going to do is you're going to add a dot of hot glue to each of these tips and hold it in position, and then we'll take it out of the vehicle and we will secure each of these even more by adding more hot glue. Understand that the hot glue isn't to permanently mount this. We're going to be using the fiberglass resin and fiberglass materials and the body filler to strengthen this panel and to actually physically hold this in place forever. These are just temporarily holding it while we stretch our material. Now I need to create my surface. I need to get this one looking like this. You can see I've already done this one. I've stretched the grill fabric over. Let's look at the process for doing this. I start with scuffing up the panel using some sandpaper, and I do this so that the glue and the fiberglass resin will adhere to the panel better. Next, I'm applying some thin tape, and I kind of use this as a measurement tool to make sure that I'm a certain distance away from the edge of this line, and I also use it as a marking tool to measure out and have a symmetrical shape on each panel. I draw lines on the panel using the edge of that tape as a guide using a Sharpie. Now it's time to apply the grill cloth. I'll put a link to this grill cloth that I used down in the video description, where you can find a list to all the tools that are used in this video. You can see that I'm also cutting it down to size. Cutting it down makes it more manageable because now I'm going to add a bead of hot glue along those lines that I made earlier. I'll pull the cloth over and then I secure it in place using the edge of an old gift card. I continue this process of stretching and forming that shape until I pull over on the back side of this panel. With that shape formed, I now carefully run my razor blade through that bead of glue, and I find that running it through the glue like this gives me a really nice clean cut. And with that, I have now created a surface that we can fiberglass upon. I I do want to reiterate that using this thin tape like this to create the lines, again, really helps create symmetry. By using those same lines on each side, I'm not just haphazardly gluing this wherever I happen to stretch it to. I've created something that is really nice and symmetrical. I've used hot glue up until this point to position the grill cloth because I wanted to be able to reposition it if need be. But now that we're good to go, what I'm going to do is take some thin CA glue and I'm going to apply it around the outside perimeter, and I'm going to use the activator to activate it. Now I need to prepare these for applying the fiberglass resin to add some strength to this surface. Now the first thing is, fiberglass resin doesn't really like to stick to plastic very well. So what we want to do is we want to do whatever we can to encourage adhesion. I've already sanded this, I've cleaned it off with a painter's adhesion promoter, but something else I want to do around the outside here, just to make sure that there is no separation whatsoever, is I'm going to drill a bunch of little holes around the outside. By doing this, I ensure that I'll get a good mechanical bond, as the resin will actually flow through those holes and create kind of a mushroomed plug, almost like a rivet on the other side. It will do that automatically on its own, so now we're going to have a good bond everywhere. The fiberglass resin I'm going to be using is this stuff from US Composites. It's their 435 standard polyester layup resin. You always want to take a look at the instructions to determine how much of the hardener you need to add to the resin in order to activate it. Next, I thoroughly mix that mixture to make sure that the activator is completely saturated throughout all of the resin, and now I can start applying it to the surface of that grill cloth. Once I've completely applied the resin to all of the shaped surface, it's going to look something like this. Now I want to allow the resin to completely dry overnight because next I'm going to be trimming away that extra grill cloth from the front of the ring. I do this because I want that next application of resin to really bite into that edge that we created on the ring earlier using the rabbiting bit. And you can see I'm also protecting that inside face using this piece here with a little bit of tape. Now, to actually add strength to the front of the panel, I'm going to be using this stuff here. This is fiberglass chop mat. When it comes to fiberglassing, understand that the resin alone does not add strength. It's this, the actual fiberglass material itself, that adds strength. So when you see somebody saying that they poured resin on the inside of their subwoofer enclosure to add a bunch of strength to the walls, you can tell them that they're full of it because the resin alone does not add strength. I'll continue the application of matte until I have 2 layers down, and then I'm going to allow it to dry, but I do want to add a little bit of strength to the back side of the panel too, and it will also help further bond our ring in. So I'm using this stuff, some Duraglass mixed with some resin to create a mixture. I add in the activator for both the Duraglass and for the resin in order to get this to start to cure, and then I'm just going to pour it on the inside of the panel. After giving ample time for everything to dry, it's sanding time. I want to knock down any of those loose fiberglass fibers and just make the surface somewhat smooth in preparation for our body filler phase. If I look closely here, I can see that the resin has really bonded well with the edge of that ring, which is exactly what we need, and now I can fill in that corner gap using the body filler. Now, the most important step of this process, I really have to make sure that I use good body filler. This stuff is self-explanatory. I mix it up and then I apply it on the surface, but this is the biggest thing that sets good body filler apart from bad body filler, is when it's still somewhat curing in its green stage. If we start to sand right now, it's going to sand really, really nicely. We can quickly shape that surface and we don't have to spend hours upon hours sanding. The other trick with body filler is not to sand too deep. If you're finding that you really need to sand a while to get rid of a groove, you should stop and do a second application like I did here, and then you can do a third and final application with a material like this. This is called Easy Sand, which is a final stage filler. Once I've sanded smooth, I'm going to apply a filler primer. This will fill in any pinholes, and it will also make the panels gray, which is important for what I'm going to be doing with the upholstery material. I was able to find a factory match headliner piece from my local upholstery supplier, but what I need to do is I need to remove that foam layer. I do this by carefully peeling the cloth apart. I now need to use a contact adhesive to stick these two together, and I'm using this 3M Super 77. If you were wrapping your panels with an upholstery vinyl, I would strongly recommend not to use this glue. You should use the glue that I have linked in a separate video. I'll put it up in the corner of the screen. As with any contact adhesive, you want to give it time to dry because it sticks to itself. So I've done that, and now I can start applying the two different surfaces together. I use a brand new sharp blade in order to trim the material on the inside of this ring here, and then I carefully trim around the outside and the back of the panel as well. So here we have it, our panel is looking awesome. So now what I need to do is I need to drill and tap the holes that will hold the speaker in place. And this is an advantage of using acrylic. I can drill and tap the acrylic, and then we can use machine fasteners to undo and reattach this speaker as many times as we need to. I can now carefully remove the backing paper from our little insert piece. This is a show piece, so I left the backing paper on there so it wouldn't get scratched up or anything. And now the best part, we can get our JL Audio C7 component speakers mounted. I started with mounting the mid-range, and here I am adding the grill, and now I can mount the little tweeter housing in place as well. So let's take a nice close look here. These are looking beautiful. They're really going to match the factory look of the vehicle really well, and I can't wait to hear these. Now on the back side of the panel, I did add some sound treatment materials. I really want to make sure that this thing isn't going to vibrate and that it's really nice and acoustically dead. So I did that, and I also prepped the wiring with these plugs here. You may have noticed one is a male and one is a female. That way I can't potentially mix up the wiring once plugged in the vehicle. I also added the protection capacitor in line for the tweeter lead. If you want to learn what the heck that is and why it's needed, definitely check out my overview video on these speakers to learn more about the C7 components. Now this 6.5-inch C7 woofer that I need to put in the door is a beast, so be sure to come back for the next video where I'm going to show you guys how I made some custom speaker adapters to mount it. A special thanks to JL Audio for being the official speaker sponsor for this build. Definitely looking forward to getting that C7 woofer installed. And a special thanks to Lonnie, Ali, William, Marco, Steve, Emmanuel, Jerry, and the rest of the Patreon membership team. A big thanks to all those guys for making these videos possible. You can check out the other videos for this project here on screen. As always, my friends, design, build, and install.